Looking at you right now, I can see that skeptical look. The one that says, another neighbor dispute, another Karen story. But trust me when I tell you this, watching your own home get demolished through a live drone feed while you're 200 miles away, that's a whole different kind of hell. And if you're watching Karenology, you know it's never just about property lines. My name's Mark, and 40 years I've lived on that piece of land by Clearwater Lake. Built my cabin with these hands back in '85, right after my discharge. Nothing fancy, just solid oak beams, stone foundation, wraparound porch where I'd drink my morning coffee and watch the sun come up over the water. That cabin wasn't just my home, it was my sanctuary. The notification hit my phone at 6:30 a.m. sharp. Motion detected, live stream active. I was in Denver, 3 days into an engineering consultation job that was supposed to set me up for a comfortable retirement. My security drone, a little Mavic I'd installed 6 months earlier after some kids had been messing around my dock, was doing its job. Seed, drone, stream. What I saw on that tiny screen made my blood turn to ice water. Karen Miller stood in my front yard, wearing a bright orange safety vest and white hard hat, clipboard in one hand, pointing with the other at a demolition crew that was already swinging sledgehammers into my porch supports. The sound came through crystal clear. The crack of splintering wood, the thud of hammers against what I'd built with my own sweat and dreams. "Take it down to the foundation," I heard her shout over the noise. "Every board, every beam, I want nothing left standing." The camera angle was perfect, too perfect. Karen looked directly into the lens, not once, but 3 times. And each time she smiled, that cold, calculated smile that told me this wasn't just demolition. This was theater. She knew I was watching. She wanted me to watch. Seed, Karen performance. My hands were shaking so hard, I could barely hold the phone. 3 hours. 3 hours of driving mountain roads to get home. And by then, it would all be gone. The walls where I'd hung my father's Purple Heart. The kitchen where my ex-wife Sarah and I had shared our last decent conversation before the divorce. The bedroom where I'd cried myself to sleep the night she moved out. I threw my tools in the truck and hit the road doing 90. But here's what chewed at me during that hellish drive. Karen had keys. On the live feed, I watched her walk right up to my front door and unlock it like she owned the place. Keys I'd never given anyone. Keys that should have been impossible for her to have. Seed, mysterious, Seshi's keys. Ever feel like you're living in someone else's nightmare? Like reality just tilted sideways and nothing makes sense anymore? That's what those 3 hours felt like. Every mile marker was another piece of my life being reduced to rubble. When I finally pulled into my driveway, the silence was deafening. No more hammering, no more shouting. Just Karen Miller standing next to a mountain of splintered oak and twisted metal that used to be my home, holding a manila folder and wearing that same satisfied smile. "Mark," she called out cheerfully, like we were old friends meeting for coffee. "I was wondering when you get back. Don't worry, we took care of everything." Behind her, a small crowd of neighbors had gathered. The Johnsons from next door, old Pete from the corner lot, even quiet Mrs. Chen who never talked to anyone. They weren't looking at the wreckage, they were looking at me. And in their eyes, I saw something that cut deeper than any sledgehammer could. They thought I deserved this. Karen's clipboard rustled in the evening breeze as she flipped through what looked like official documents. The smugness radiating off her was thick enough to cut with a knife. "Illegal structure," she announced to the crowd, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Violation of Homeowner Association Building Codes, Section 12.4. No permits, no inspections, no compliance with setback requirements." She held up a paper with an official-looking seal. "Emergency demolition order, signed by the county." I grabbed the document from her hands. The letterhead looked legitimate, County Building Authority, complete with their eagle logo. But something felt wrong about the signature at the bottom. The ink was too fresh, too dark compared to the printed text above it. "This is my signature," I said, pointing to the bottom line. "You're telling me I signed an order to demolish my own house?" "You did." Karen's voice carried that special tone she used when she thought she was being clever. "Last month's homeowner association meeting, motion to remove non-compliant structures. You voted yes." The neighbors were nodding along like this made perfect sense. Mrs. Johnson whispered something to her husband about abandoned properties and property values. Pete just shook his head like he was disappointed in me. But I knew something they didn't. I hadn't been to a homeowner association meeting in 3 years. Haven't voted on anything since Sarah left, and I stopped caring about neighborhood politics. This signature was as fake as Karen's concern for building codes. Where exactly was this meeting held? I asked, pulling out my phone to record her answer. The community center, of course. Second Thursday, 7 p.m. You sat right there in the third row and raised your hand when we called for the vote. She gestured toward the pile of debris that used to be my porch. Really, Mark, if you didn't want this to happen, you shouldn't have voted for it. That's when I noticed something that made my pulse quicken. 3 of my neighbors were avoiding eye contact completely. The Johnsons kept looking at their shoes. Pete suddenly found something fascinating about his watch. Even Mrs. Chen was studying the ground like she'd lost something important down there. Funny thing about that meeting, I said, stepping closer to Karen. The recording was still running on my phone. I was in Chicago that week. Hospital stay, appendicitis, got the medical records right here in my truck if you'd like to see them. For just a second, maybe half a heartbeat, Karen's mask slipped. I saw something flicker behind her eyes. Not surprise, recognition. She knew I'd been in the hospital. She'd counted on it. Well, she said, recovering with that practiced smile, perhaps you sent a proxy, or maybe you're misremembering the dates. Hospital stays can be confusing. The crowd was still watching, but now I could feel the energy shifting. A couple of neighbors were looking between Karen and me with less certainty. The Johnsons had stopped whispering. Even Pete was paying attention now, instead of checking his watch. But Karen wasn't done. She reached into her folder and pulled out another document, this one with photographs stapled to the corner, black and white surveillance photos that looked like they'd been taken from a considerable distance. These were submitted as evidence, she said, holding them up for everyone to see. Your cabin posed a fire hazard to neighboring properties. Faulty wiring, non-code electrical work, propane tanks stored too close to the structure. The fire marshal agreed it needed immediate removal. I looked at the photos. They showed my cabin from different angles, but something was off about them too. The shadows were wrong for the timestamps printed at the bottom, and those propane tanks she was talking about. I'd moved those to the far side of my property 2 months ago after a routine safety inspection that had found nothing wrong. Who took these pictures, Karen? Anonymous complaint, someone concerned about neighborhood safety. She tucked the photos back into her folder. Look, Mark, I know this is hard. Nobody wants to lose their home, but rules are rules, and safety is everyone's responsibility. The neighbors were nodding again, but I could see doubt creeping into a few faces. Mrs. Chen was actually looking at me now instead of the ground. The Johnsons had moved closer, like they wanted to hear better. That's when my phone buzzed with a text message. Unknown number, check your security footage from last Tuesday, 2 a.m. Someone was very interested in your propane setup. I looked up from my phone to find Karen watching me with sharp eyes. She'd seen me read the message, and for the first time since I'd arrived home to find my life in ruins, I saw something that looked like worry cross her face. Who had sent that text, and what exactly had my security system recorded while I was lying in a hospital bed in Chicago, believing my home was safe? The anonymous text burned in my mind as I drove to the sheriff's office that night. 2 a.m. last Tuesday. That was 4 days before the demolition. What had someone seen on my property that Karen didn't want me to know about? Sheriff Davis looked like he'd rather be anywhere else when I walked into his office with my phone full of drone footage. He's a decent man, been keeping the peace in our county for 15 years, but he's also the kind of guy who trusts paperwork more than people. Mark, I'm sorry about your cabin, he said, settling his bulk into a creaky desk chair. But from what I can see here, the homeowner association had legal authority. All the documentation looks proper. I slid my phone across his desk, the video queued up to show Karen directing the demolition crew. Take a look at this. Really look. She's performing for the camera, Sheriff. She knew my drone was streaming live. Davis squinted at the small screen, his weathered face illuminated by the footage of my home being destroyed. I watched his expression change as he noticed the same details that had haunted me during the drive here. The way Karen kept glancing at the camera, the theatrical gestures, the timing of her commands, perfectly staged for maximum emotional impact. That is unusual behavior, he admitted. But, Mark, I've got an official demolition order right here. county seal, proper signatures, everything by the book. He pulled a file from his desk drawer. Says here you were notified of the violation 30 days ago. Says you had time to remedy the situation and chose not to. I never received any notification. I was in the hospital, then straight to Denver for work. Check my medical records. Davis frowned and flipped through more pages. According to this, notices were hand-delivered to your residence and signed for by... He paused, checking the signature line. By you, Mark Stevens, signed and dated 3 weeks ago. The room felt like it was tilting, another forged signature, but this one was different. It looked more like my actual handwriting than the demolition order had. Someone had taken time to study how I wrote my name. That's not my signature, Sheriff. Mark, I understand you're upset, but look at it. I leaned over his desk and pointed to the signature. See how the S in Stevens curves at the bottom? I don't write it that way. Haven't since high school. And look at the date. 3 weeks ago, I was still in Chicago, recovering from surgery. Davis pulled out a magnifying glass, the old-fashioned kind that made him look like a detective from a 1940s movie. After a long minute of examination, he set it down with a heavy sigh. Damn it all to hell, he muttered. You're right. This signature's been practiced, but it's not quite right. The pressure's different too. You can see it in how the ink sits on the paper. Now we were getting somewhere. So what do we do about it? That's when Davis showed me something that made my blood run cold. 3 sworn witness statements, all dated the same day as my alleged signature, all confirming they'd seen me receive the notice personally. The witnesses, my neighbors, the Johnsons, Pete Kowalski, and Mrs. Chen. They lied, I said, but even as the words came out, doubt crept in. Why would Mrs. Chen lie about something like this? She barely knew me, had no reason to get involved in neighborhood politics. Or, Davis said carefully, someone who looks enough like you accepted that notice. Someone who knew exactly when you'd be away and for how long. The anonymous text suddenly made more sense. Someone had been watching my property, learning my routines, maybe even timing their activities around my hospital stay. But who? And why go to such elaborate lengths to destroy my cabin? Sheriff, I need to get back to my property. Check that security footage from Tuesday night. I'll come with you, Davis said, reaching for his hat. If someone's been forging documents and impersonating residents, that's a felony, multiple felonies. We drove back through town in convoy, his patrol car following my truck. The streets were quiet except for the distant sound of a dog barking and the hum of streetlights coming to life. But as we turned onto my street, I noticed something that made my hands tighten on the steering wheel. Karen's house was dark except for one window on the second floor, and in that window, barely visible behind sheer curtains, was the silhouette of someone watching us arrive. As we pulled into my driveway, my phone buzzed again. Same unknown number. The footage from Tuesday is gone, but I made a copy. Meet me at Murphy's Bar tomorrow at 8 p.m. Come alone and trust no one until then, especially not your neighbors. I looked up at Karen's window. The silhouette was gone, but I could feel eyes on me from somewhere in the darkness. How many people in my own neighborhood were part of whatever this was? And what had they seen on that security footage that was worth destroying my entire life to hide? Murphy's Bar sits at the edge of town, like a refuge for people who've run out of other options. The kind of place where the bartender doesn't ask questions and the regulars mind their own business. Walking through those doors at 8 p.m. sharp, I felt like I was stepping into a John le Carré novel. The text had said, "Come alone," but I'd brought Sheriff Davis anyway, parked a block away watching the entrance. If this was a setup, I wanted backup close by. The mystery messenger turned out to be Jake Morrison, my neighbor from 2 streets over. Computer programmer, worked from home, the kind of guy who noticed everything and said nothing. We'd shared maybe 50 words in the 5 years since he'd moved in. "Took you long enough," he said, sliding a beer across the scarred wooden table. His laptop was open, screen angled so only we could see it. I've been sitting on this footage for 3 days, trying to decide if I should get involved. Why did you? Because what they did to you was wrong, and because... He paused, taking a long pull from his beer. Because I think I'm next. The security footage on his screen showed my property from an angle I'd never seen before, taken from somewhere high up, probably his second-floor window. The timestamp read 2:17 a.m., last Tuesday. Two figures moved through my yard like shadows, one carrying what looked like a large bag, the other holding a flashlight with a red filter. They knew exactly where they were going, straight to my propane tank storage area behind the cabin. "Watch this part," Jake said, clicking forward a few minutes. The figure with the bag pulled out what looked like several small propane canisters and placed them strategically around my larger tanks. The other person, smaller, definitely a woman, was taking photographs from multiple angles with a camera that had a bright flash. "They're staging the fire hazard," I said, the pieces clicking together. "Setting up those photos Karen showed everyone." "Gets worse," Jake muttered, fast-forwarding again. "Look who's directing the operation." The woman with the camera stepped into the light for just a moment, adjusting something on one of the propane tanks. Even with the grainy night vision quality, there was no mistaking that profile, those distinctive mannerisms. Karen Miller, in my yard at 2 a.m, 4 days before my cabin was demolished, setting up fake evidence to justify the demolition. "This is felony fraud," I said. "Breaking and entering, falsifying evidence, conspiracy. We've got her dead to rights." Jake's expression darkened. "Keep watching." The timestamp jumped to 2:45 a.m. A third figure appeared at the edge of the frame, taller, broader shoulders, moving with the careful step of someone older. As he came closer to the propane tanks, the camera angle caught his face in the filtered flashlight beam. Sheriff Davis. My blood turned to ice water. The man I'd brought in as backup, the man I'd trusted with the evidence of Karen's fraud, had been part of the setup from the beginning. "Jesus Christ," I whispered. "How deep does this go?" "Deep enough that I'm scared," Jake said, closing the laptop. "After I recorded this, I started paying more attention to the neighborhood, really watching. You know how many people have been in and out of Karen's house this week? 7 different cars, people staying way past normal visiting hours, and yesterday someone broke into my garage. Did they take anything?" "That's the weird part. They didn't take anything, but they moved stuff around, like they were looking for something specific and didn't find it." He leaned closer, lowering his voice. "I think they were looking for this footage. Karen knows I have a clear line of sight to your property. She just doesn't know I'm paranoid enough to record everything." The weight of betrayal settled on me like a lead blanket. Not just Karen, but Davis too. How many others? The neighbors who'd lied about seeing me sign for that notice. Were they part of this, or just scared into cooperation? "Why are they doing this?" I asked. "What's so important about my property that they'd commit multiple felonies to get it?" Jake pulled out a folded piece of paper, a printout from what looked like a real estate website. "Your cabin sits on a 1/4 acre of lakefront property, prime development land. But here's the thing. It can't be developed while there's a historic structure on it. Your cabin was built in 1985, which makes it eligible for historic preservation status. Karen's been trying to get the whole lakefront rezoned for commercial development, but your cabin was blocking the project. So they destroyed it to clear the way. And now, with the cabin gone and you facing financial ruin from the demolition costs, they're betting you'll be forced to sell. Karen's already got a buyer lined up, some development company out of Atlanta. They want to build condos and a marina." The scope of it was staggering. This wasn't just about neighborhood politics or homeowner association power trips. This was about money, big money, and they'd been willing to destroy my life to get it. My phone buzzed with a text from Sheriff Davis. "Everything quiet at your place, heading home. Keep me posted if anything unusual happens." I showed the message to Jake, who just shook his head. He's good, I'll give him that, playing both sides perfectly. What do we do now? If Davis is dirty, who can we trust? Jake finished his beer and closed his laptop with a decisive snap. "We take this to the FBI, federal crimes, interstate commerce, conspiracy. This is way beyond local jurisdiction now." But as we got ready to leave Murphy's bar, I noticed something that made my skin crawl. Through the window, I could see a familiar SUV parked across the street. Karen's vehicle, the same one that had been at my property during the demolition. She'd been watching us the whole time. Karen's SUV pulled away from Murphy's the moment Jake and I stepped outside, but not before I got a good look at the license plate. She wasn't even trying to be subtle anymore. The message was clear. We see you, we're watching, and we're not afraid. "My truck or yours?" Jake asked, keys already in his hand. "Neither," I said, pulling out my phone. We're being followed. Time to get creative. I called my old Army buddy Rick, who ran a garage on the other side of town. 20 minutes later, we were driving out in his beat-up work van, the kind of vehicle that blends into traffic like camouflage. Jake had uploaded the security footage to 3 different cloud servers and sent copies to email addresses I'd never heard of. Insurance policy, he explained. If something happens to us, those files go public automatically. The FBI field office was in the state capital, 90 miles of dark highway away. Jake spent the drive explaining the technical details of his surveillance setup, while I tried to process the scope of what we'd uncovered. This wasn't just Karen Miller being a neighborhood tyrant. This was organized crime, hiding behind homeowner association bylaws. But as we pulled into the FBI parking garage at midnight, my phone rang with a number I recognized, Sheriff Davis. "Mark, where are you? I just drove by your property and your truck's not there. Everything all right?" I looked at Jake, who was shaking his head frantically, but something in Davis's voice caught my attention. A strain, almost like fear. Was he genuinely concerned, or fishing for information about our whereabouts? "I'm fine, Sheriff. Just staying at a friend's place tonight. Needed some distance from everything." "Good thinking. Listen, Mark, I've been doing some digging on those forged documents. Found some inconsistencies in the paperwork trail. Can you meet me tomorrow morning? Early, say 6 a.m. at the office? I think we might have grounds for fraud charges." The line went dead before I could respond. Jake was staring at me like I'd just answered a call from the devil himself. "You're not seriously considering meeting him? What if he's trying to help? What if he's not part of this?" "Mark, I watched him help stage fake evidence at 2 a.m. There's no innocent explanation for that." But doubt was gnawing at me. Davis had been sheriff for 15 years. He'd never shown signs of corruption before. What if Karen had something on him? What if he was being forced to cooperate and now wanted out? The FBI night duty officer listened to our story with the kind of practiced patience that comes from hearing wild conspiracy theories on a regular basis. But when Jake pulled out his laptop and showed the security footage, everything changed. "Agent Martinez will want to see this," she said, reaching for her phone. "Can you wait here? This might take a while." 3 hours later, Agent Sarah Martinez walked into the interview room, looking like she'd been dragged out of bed and forced into a business suit. But her eyes were sharp, and she'd clearly reviewed our evidence. "Mr. Stevens, Mr. Morrison, what you've shown me is compelling, but it's also dangerous. If your local sheriff is involved in this conspiracy, approaching him tomorrow could put you at risk." "So what do we do?" "You go to that meeting," Martinez said, "but you go wired. We'll have agents positioned around the sheriff's office. If Davis is clean, we'll know. If he's dirty, we'll have evidence of his involvement." Jake was shaking his head. "This is insane. You're using Mark as bait." "With full protection and real-time monitoring," Martinez assured him. "But we need to know how deep this corruption goes. If it's just Karen Miller and Sheriff Davis, we can handle it locally. If it goes higher, county commissioners, judges, state officials, we need to know that too." The wire was smaller than I'd expected, barely visible once they'd taped it inside my shirt. The backup team would be positioned in unmarked vehicles around the sheriff's office, close enough to respond within seconds if things went wrong. "Remember," Martinez said as we prepared to leave, "act natural. Don't push for information. Let him talk and trust that we're listening." Dawn was breaking over the mountains as I drove back toward town in Rick's van, Jake following at a distance in an FBI vehicle. The wire felt like it was burning against my chest, and every mile brought me closer to a confrontation that could either clear Davis's name or confirm my worst fears. My phone buzzed with another text from the unknown number. "Don't trust the FBI either. Some of them are on Karen's payroll. Get out of town now while you still can." But it was too late to turn back. I was already pulling into the sheriff's office parking lot, where Davis was waiting by his patrol car, coffee in hand, and a grim expression on his face. "Mark," he called out as I approached, "glad you came. We need to talk about Karen Miller, and we need to talk fast because I think both our lives are in danger." Sheriff Davis looked like a man who hadn't slept in days. His uniform was wrinkled, his usually neat mustache looked unkempt, and there were deep circles under his eyes. But it was the way he kept glancing over his shoulder that really got my attention. "Inside," he said, unlocking the office door. "We can't talk out here." The wire against my chest felt like it was broadcasting my heartbeat to the entire FBI surveillance team. I followed Davis into his office, every instinct screaming at me to run. But Agent Martinez's voice echoed in my head. Let him talk. Mark, what I'm about to tell you is going to sound crazy, Davis began, settling heavily into his chair. But Karen Miller isn't working alone. She's got connections that go way higher than our little county sheriff's office. He pulled out a manila folder, thick with documents and photographs. My heart nearly stopped when I saw surveillance photos of myself, entering the hospital in Chicago, leaving for Denver, even sitting in Murphy's bar last night with Jake. They've been watching you for months, Davis continued, ever since the city announced that lakefront development project. Your cabin was the only thing standing between Karen and a $20 million construction deal. How do you know all this? Davis's laugh was bitter and tired. Because they approached me 6 months ago, offered me $50,000 to look the other way when they demolished your cabin. Said it would be a simple building code violation, nothing too complicated. The recording device was picking up every word, but I found myself genuinely curious now. What changed? My conscience, for starters, but mostly it was my daughter Emma. His voice softened when he mentioned her name. She's a senior at State, studying criminal justice. Wants to be a cop like her old man. How was I supposed to look at her if I'd sold my integrity for $50,000? He flipped through more pages in the folder, showing me bank records, phone transcripts, meeting notes. So I said no, told Karen I wouldn't be part of their scheme. That's when things got ugly. Davis pulled out his phone and showed me a series of text messages, photos of his daughter walking to class, sitting in the campus library, getting into her car. The timestamps were all from this week. They made it clear that my cooperation wasn't optional. Either I helped them, or Emma would have an accident. The kind that looks random but isn't. The pieces were falling into place, but not in the way I'd expected. So, you were at my property Tuesday night. I was there, Davis admitted, but not by choice. Karen wanted a law enforcement witness to the fire hazard discovery. Said it would make the demolition order more credible. I watched them plant those propane canisters and hated myself for every second of it. Why are you telling me this now? Davis leaned forward, his voice dropping to a whisper. Because last night, they escalated. Karen called me after you visited the FBI. Somehow, she knew exactly where you'd been and who you'd talked to. She's got connections inside federal law enforcement, Mark. People feeding her information. The anonymous text message suddenly made terrifying sense. Don't trust the FBI either. Some of them are on Karen's payroll. Agent Martinez, I said carefully. Sarah Martinez. Do you know her? Davis's face went pale. Medium height, dark hair, scar on her left hand from a childhood accident. That's her. Mark, that woman isn't FBI. I don't know who she is, but Sarah Martinez died in a car accident 3 years ago. I know because I worked that crash scene myself. The wire against my chest suddenly felt like it was burning. If the woman calling herself Agent Martinez was fake, then the entire FBI operation was compromised. Jake was in danger. The surveillance team positioning around the sheriff's office might not even exist. We need to get out of here, Davis said, grabbing his keys. If they know you talk to fake federal agents, they'll move fast. Karen's got a cleanup crew ready to eliminate loose ends. But as he reached for the door, it swung open without warning. Karen Miller walked in like she owned the place, followed by 2 men I'd never seen before. Both were wearing dark suits and had the kind of build that suggested they weren't accountants. Sheriff Davis, Mr. Stevens, Karen said with that same cold smile she'd worn while watching my cabin being destroyed. So nice to see you both in one place. It makes things so much simpler. The taller of the 2 men moved behind Davis's desk, effectively blocking our exit through the back door. The other positioned himself by the front entrance. We were trapped. You've caused us considerable inconvenience, Karen continued, pulling out a chair and sitting down like she was hosting a business meeting. The development project was supposed to be completed quietly, with minimal complications. Instead, you've involved federal agents, computer programmers, and security footage that should have been destroyed weeks ago. What do you want? I asked, though I was pretty sure I knew the answer. Your signature on a property sale agreement, $500,000 for your lakefront lot. More than generous considering the recent, structural issues with your previous residence. She slid a contract across Davis's desk. The buyer was listed as Clearwater Development LLC, and the sale price was exactly what she'd mentioned. But there was something else. A clause requiring the sale to be completed within 24 hours and penalties for breach of contract that would bankrupt me. And if I refuse? Karen's smile turned predatory. Sheriff Davis has already explained the consequences of refusing our reasonable offers. I believe his daughter Emma is particularly vulnerable right now, being so far from home and family protection. That's when I realized the wire I was wearing might be our only chance of survival. If the real FBI was monitoring this conversation, they'd know exactly where we were and what was happening. But if the surveillance team was as fake as Agent Martinez, then Jake and I had walked into a trap with no backup at all. Davis was looking at me with desperation in his eyes, and I understood. He'd tried to do the right thing, but they had leverage that made resistance impossible. How do you fight people who are willing to threaten your family? The pen Karen offered me felt heavier than it should have as I reached across the desk. But just as my fingers touched the barrel, my phone buzzed with another text from that unknown number. Help is coming. Keep them talking for 3 more minutes. I looked up to find Karen watching me with sharp interest. She'd seen the message too. Expecting someone? She asked with deadly calm. 3 minutes felt like 3 hours. I set the pen down slowly, buying time, while trying to figure out who had sent that text and whether help was actually coming, or if this was another layer of Karen's elaborate trap. You know what's funny about all this? I said, leaning back in my chair like I had all day. I never actually cared about the money. That cabin wasn't worth much. Old wood, basic foundation, nothing fancy. Karen's smile flickered. She wanted me to sign quickly, get this over with. The longer we talked, the more nervous she seemed to get. Then why not just sell and move on? She asked. $500,000 is enough to start over somewhere nice. Because it wasn't about the cabin, I continued. It was about watching my whole life disappear on a phone screen while some woman in an orange vest smiled at the camera. That was personal. Davis was watching me with growing understanding. He could see what I was doing, keeping them engaged, running down whatever clock was ticking toward our possible rescue. Personal? The taller man by the back door spoke for the first time. His voice had an accent I couldn't place. This is business, Mr. Stevens. Nothing personal about real estate development. Really? Then explain the performance. I pulled out my phone, making sure to move slowly so nobody got trigger happy. See, I've watched that demolition footage maybe 50 times now, and every time, I noticed something new. I played the video on speaker, filling the small office with the sound of my cabin being destroyed, but I'd queued it up to the moment when Karen looked directly at the drone camera. Right there, I said, freezing the frame. That's not the look of someone doing their job. That's someone enjoying causing pain. That's someone who wanted me to watch. Karen's composure was cracking. You're wasting time with psychological nonsense. Sign the contract. But here's what I really want to know, I continued, ignoring the contract entirely. How did you get my keys? I've been thinking about that for days. Those were the only set I had. Never gave copies to anyone. Never lost them. So, how did you walk up to my front door and unlock it like you owned the place? The question hit home. I could see it in the way Karen's eyes darted to Davis, then to her 2 associates. This was something she hadn't expected me to figure out. Keys can be copied, she said, but her voice had lost its confident edge. Sure, if you have access to the originals, but the only time those keys left my possession was... I paused, the realization hitting me like a physical blow. The hospital. When they took my personal effects in Chicago, someone copied my keys while I was in surgery. Davis was staring at me now. Mark, that would mean this conspiracy reaches way beyond our little lakefront town, I finished. Hospital staff, federal agents, real estate developers, law enforcement. How many people are on your payroll, Karen? She was standing now, her carefully controlled mask finally slipping completely. Enough. Sign the contract now, or Sheriff Davis's daughter won't make it to her graduation. That's when I heard it, the faint sound of vehicles pulling into the parking lot outside. Not 1 or 2 cars, but several. Heavy engines, doors slamming, voices calling out instructions. Karen heard it too. Her face went white as she rushed to the window. FBI, everyone on the ground now. The voice outside was amplified through a bullhorn, and it definitely wasn't the fake Agent Martinez I'd met the night before. This was a coordinated federal response, complete with what sounded like tactical teams taking positions around the building. "You said you had people inside the FBI," the taller associate snapped at Karen. "I did. I do." But she was backing away from the window, her confidence completely shattered. Davis was on his feet now, his hand moving toward his service weapon. "Karen, tell your boys to stand down. It's over." "It's not over," she said, but her voice was shaking. "The development project has too much money behind it, too many important people invested in seeing it through. They'll find another way." The office door burst open, but instead of FBI agents, Jake Morrison stumbled in, hands zip-tied behind his back and a cut on his forehead. Behind him came a third man I hadn't seen before, older, wearing an expensive suit that looked out of place in a small-town sheriff's office. "Sorry to interrupt," the newcomer said, with a voice that carried authority like a weapon. "But I'm afraid Agent Martinez and her team won't be joining us. They've been delayed." My heart sank. The cavalry wasn't coming. The voices outside had been a recording, probably playing through portable speakers to make us think we were being rescued. Jake's appearance meant they'd grabbed him from whatever safe house the FBI had provided. "Jake," I said, "you okay?" "I've been better," he replied through split lips. Turns out trusting federal agents isn't always the smart play. The man in the expensive suit moved to Karen's side, clearly the person really in charge of this operation. "Ms. Miller has been useful, but she's also been sloppy, drawing federal attention, leaving digital evidence, making this much more complicated than necessary." He turned to look at me directly. "The Clearwater Development Project represents a $200 million investment. We're not going to let property disputes and security footage interfere with that kind of money." "Who are you?" I asked. "Someone who solves problems. And right now, you and your friend represent a significant problem." But as he spoke, I noticed something that gave me the first hope I'd felt in hours. The wire taped to my chest was still active, and the small LED indicator was blinking rapidly. Whatever was happening, someone was still listening. And that's when the real FBI arrived. The sound of real federal agents hitting the building was nothing like the recording they had played to fool us. This was controlled chaos. Boots on concrete, radios crackling, the systematic movement of professionals who'd done this 1,000 times before. "FBI, nobody move!" The office windows exploded inward as tactical teams came through simultaneously from 3 directions. The man in the expensive suit reached inside his jacket, but Davis was faster. His service weapon was out and aimed before the guy's hand cleared his lapel. "Don't," Davis said quietly. "I've had a really bad week, and I'm looking for an excuse." Karen and her associates were face down on the floor within seconds, zip-tied and Mirandized by agents who moved with military precision. But I barely registered any of it because standing in the doorway, very much alive and definitely not the woman I'd met the night before, was the real Agent Sarah Martinez. "Mr. Stevens, Mr. Morrison," she said, cutting Jake's restraints with a tactical knife. "Sorry we're late to the party. Took us a while to sort out which federal agents were real and which ones were on Karen's payroll." "How did you find us?" Martinez smiled and tapped her ear. "That wire you've been wearing? It wasn't connected to fake Agent Martinez's equipment. We've been listening to everything since you walked into that meeting last night. Took us this long to track down who was impersonating federal officers and coordinate a response that wouldn't tip off the dirty cops." The man in the expensive suit was being dragged to his feet by 2 agents when he looked back at me with pure hatred. "You have no idea what you've cost us," he snarled. "The development project will happen with or without your cooperation. There are ways to handle problems like you that don't require contracts." "Actually," Martinez said, "I don't think there will be a development project at all." She held up her phone, showing what looked like financial records. "Turns out Clearwater Development LLC is a shell company for a money laundering operation. Your lakefront property was just the latest piece in a much larger puzzle involving offshore accounts and interstate fraud." Karen was being lifted to her feet, her orange safety vest now wrinkled and dirty. For the first time since this nightmare began, she looked small and defeated. "You don't understand," she said desperately. "I was trying to improve the neighborhood, bring in jobs, increase property values. the development would have been good for everyone. Except for Mark, Jake said, touching the cut on his forehead. And except for Sheriff Davis's daughter. And except for all the other people you were willing to threaten and destroy to get what you wanted. Davis holstered his weapon and turned to Martinez. Agent, I need to confess my involvement in this conspiracy. I was present when they staged evidence at Mr. Stevens' property. I falsified documents and provided law enforcement cover for criminal activities. Sheriff, Martinez said gently, we heard your conversation with Mr. Stevens. Coercion under threat to family members is a mitigating factor. You'll face disciplinary action, but probably not criminal charges, especially considering you ultimately chose to cooperate with our investigation. As the FBI led their prisoners out to waiting vehicles, I found myself standing alone in Davis's destroyed office, trying to process everything that had happened. My cabin was still gone. My sense of security in my own neighborhood was probably gone forever. But somehow, I felt lighter than I had in weeks. So what happens now? I asked Martinez. Now you rebuild. The insurance company will have to pay out once we provide evidence that the demolition was based on fraudulent documents. The homeowner association will be dissolved and reformed under court supervision, and Karen Miller will be spending the next decade or so in federal prison. Jake appeared beside me, a bandage over his cut and a grin on his face despite everything we'd been through. Plus, that shell company owned about 15 other properties around the lake. If the government seizes those assets, you might end up owning half the shoreline by the time the civil suits are settled. I don't want half the shoreline, I said. I just want to rebuild my cabin and live in peace. Yeah, well, Jake said, maybe this time we build it with better security. I'm thinking cameras, motion sensors, maybe a nice high fence with razor wire on top. Martinez laughed. Gentlemen, I think you've had enough excitement for one investigation. How about we start with a simple cabin and work our way up to the fortress later? 6 months later, I was sitting on the porch of my new cabin, bigger than the old one, built to code with proper permits and every safety feature the county required. The insurance settlement had been generous, and the civil lawsuit against Clearwater Development had provided enough money to never worry about property taxes again. Jake had moved into a house 2 lots over, close enough for us to keep an eye on each other, but far enough away that we weren't crowding each other's space. Sheriff Davis had been suspended for 6 months and demoted, but he'd kept his job and his pension. His daughter Emma had graduated summa cum laude and was starting at the FBI Academy in the fall. Karen Miller had been sentenced to 12 years in federal prison for conspiracy, fraud, and racketeering. The man in the expensive suit, whose name turned out to be Vincent Carrera, got 25 to life for money laundering and criminal conspiracy. The fake agent Martinez was still awaiting trial. But the best part? Every morning, when I drink my coffee on that new porch and watch the sun come up over Clearwater Lake, I know that every board, every nail, every shingle belongs to me, legally and completely. No forged signatures, no fake building codes, no corrupt officials looking to make a quick profit off my misery. Sometimes the good guys actually do win. It just takes a little longer than you'd expect and costs more than you'd like to pay. Have you ever had to fight for something that should have been yours by right? Drop me a comment if this story hits close to home. And if you made it this far, maybe hit that subscribe button, because unfortunately, there are always more Karens out there, and somebody needs to tell their stories too.